Welcome, my name is Joshua, and today we are going to be discussing and revealing some very disturbing cases of spiritual abuse. I don't use the term lightly. Very often, ironically, the term spiritual abuse is itself abused. But when legitimate cases of spiritual abuse exist, they are necessary to address. And therefore, as uncomfortable and unfortunate as all of this is, it is necessary and part of the edification of the body at large. We are constantly warned in Scripture to beware of many things. But, for example, Jesus warned his disciples, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod. Beware of becoming a religious hypocrite. And when the church begins to look more like the mafia, we have a problem. What do you do when tactics and actions resemble things out of a documentary about the mafia more than they do out of the Acts of the Apostles? And I would submit to you, much of what we're going to see herein is exactly that. And this particular group of individuals, this is a microcosm of something that happens on larger scales. Apply it in your own context. But there are massive spheres of influence herein, and therefore this requires attention. Let me say that because I have had public disputes with several of these men here pictured, there may be a propensity to think that I just have some agenda or that I have it out for them. I can tell you in truth, honestly, before God, these things are objectively disturbing whether I had any interaction with these men or not. And it should also be noted that none of these men ever had an issue with me until I first had an issue with them, which was always grounded in doctrinal issues or behavioral issues which significantly impacted doctrine, such as unbiblical partnerships and so forth. But none of them ever had a problem before I had a problem with them. But this is not really about me, though some of it will be. There's a personal element, but this is a much bigger picture. You're going to see a coalition that, again, I say, looks more like the crime families, the five crime families, right? So you've got in the mafia, you've got the Genoveses and the Colombos and the Lucchese's and the Bonanos, and they're all part of the mafia, but they're all separate and distinct. They all do their own thing. They'll ally at times, but they're all corrupt. They're all corrupt, and they're all in it for their own ends. And the Bible constantly warns us to beware the leaven of the Pharisees, to beware the leaven of Herod. And for some people, there is something of a spiritual Stockholm syndrome that takes over them. And they can't even consider the fact that somebody that they've learned from or somebody that they've supported financially or what have you could be guilty of such things. Evaluate the evidence for what it is, not for what you want it to be. And to orient ourselves, we are going to start in God's Word, the only rule of faith and practice, beginning in Esther chapter 7 and verse 3. Listen. Then Queen Esther answered and said, If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request, for we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss. So King Ahasuerus answered and said to Queen Esther, Who is he, and where is he who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing? And Esther said, The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Verse 9. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, Look, the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, standing at the house of Haman. Then the king said, "Hang him on it." So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath was subsided. Haman and his sons were hanged on the very gallows Haman had prepared to unjustly destroy Mordecai on. Haman was jealous of Mordecai. He hated Mordecai and sought to destroy him and annihilate all of his people. Haman had a position of prominence in the kingdom, and he abused that authority. And as the Bible says, he dug a pit and fell into it. The very instrument he had sought to destroy somebody else with became the thing by which God used to judge him with. And we are warned about this as well. Whatever a man sows, he will reap. God is not mocked. The spirit of Haman lives on. The Herodians conspired with the Pharisees in an attempt to destroy Jesus. They sought to catch him in his words. They conspired, they schemed, they concocted, they bore false witness. They sent out spies. You name it, they did it. Again, things you would expect to see in the mafia. These are not new problems, but there is some delusion, really, that people think the same things are not happening or couldn't possibly happen at the hands of those that they have grown to trust for some reason. Beware the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod. Herein pictured, we have Justin Peters and Phil Johnson, Todd Friel and Chris Rosebrough, J.D. Hall, and Chris Rosebrough's son, Joshua Rosebrough. We have to evaluate this for what it is. And to whom much is given, much will be required. So especially for men like Justin Peters and Todd Friel and Phil Johnson, who have these very large spheres of influence and this reputation of respectability, they're going to have to answer some very serious questions, because what's going to be revealed is going to prove their character, what it already is, what it has been. And so we are going to begin. I really just hope and pray there is not another innocent girl victimized down the road. What does this mean? Who are they talking about? We'll get to that a little bit later. Keep that in mind. Another innocent girl victimized. As I said, you're going to see a lot of the same players here, and this is relevant because they are, although independent of each other, they are very much a unit, very much a coalition, loosely speaking. They do things together. They are partners in ministry. They are comrades, etc. And because of that, they have an obligation to explain why they sanction certain behaviors, certain actions that can only be described as spiritual abuse. In fact, they could probably be described as worse, if that's possible. But they are men who have positions of prominence and abuse their authority to take advantage of others, or to look the other way in the face of it. Todd Friel, Justin Peters, Phil Johnson of Grace to You, Chris Rosebrough of Fighting for the Faith and Pirate Christian Radio, they're all together. At the Reformation Montana Conference back in 2014, Justin Peters, Phil Johnson, Chris Rosebrough, J.D. Hall of Pulpit and Pen. Vodi Bakum was even there. The next year, Phil Johnson, Todd Friel, Chris Rosebrough, J.D. Hall. The Judge Not Conference, J.D. Hall, Phil Johnson, Chris Rosebrough, Justin Peters, you get the point. Connected and consistently in not only spiritual alignment, but ministerial fellowship. And therefore, they all have a mutual responsibility to address what we are going to engage with here. And again, all of these men were prayed for prior to this video ever being made. This was approached quite reluctantly, but nevertheless necessarily. And although many of them don't like me already, and although you may not like me, know that I say in truth before God, I honestly did pray that they would repent. That would be the best thing. And yet we have to address what is. And to orient ourselves and have a proper frame of reference, we're going to begin with Jordan Hall of Pulpit and Pen. Some of you may know who that is. Some of you may know the name Pulpit and Pen. Many have termed it slander and key, and for good reason. Pulpit and Pen seems to thrive in the realm of the overtly controversial. It's really bad. And so much so that it appears that Pulpit and Pen is in something of a transitional phase. It appears that Pulpit and Pen is being rebranded as Protestia. If you have heard the name Protestia or have read articles from Protestia, that's who it is. It's Jordan Hall, or J.D. Hall, as he goes by, behind it. You'll understand better in a moment why it appears to be that it's rebranded. Now, apparently there still is a Pulpit and Pen website and a Protestia website, but Protestia seems to be the new thing taking over. When a name becomes so sullied, this happens in business, and most recently has happened with Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. They want to continue doing the work they're doing, but they can't very well do it under the banner of the name Ravi Zacharias at this point. The name is too tarnished. So they will keep many of the same people and the same objectives, but they have to rebrand somehow if they are to continue. Well, because of the many controversies that have surrounded Pulpit and Pen, I suspect that would be the underlying reason behind this rebranding into Protestia, since a whole lot of time has been spent building up the name of Pulpit and Pen. To just kind of make that take a back seat doesn't make sense unless you understand the name itself. Most people don't want anything to do with it. Most of you know what I'm talking about already, but we are going to get some context from James White. James White, I have had from Alpha and Omega Ministries. I've had public disputes with him as well over doctrinal issues, but he was a former friend and ally of Jordan Hall. If anybody has perspective on Jordan Hall, it's James White. And if anybody has reasons to agree with Jordan Hall, it's James White, and they're generally in theological agreement. Here's what James White says about Jordan Hall. Pay attention.
I think what will be demonstrated is the fact that Jordan Hall has no limits as to what he will publish, allege, assert, whether he has personal knowledge of the situation or not. He will repeat any slander that is going to serve his purposes. Anything at all. He has no limitations. He doesn't know anything about what he's talking about, but that won't stop him. He is absolutely convinced of his incredible correctness about everything. Because there was a whole section where J.D. spent time making himself look like the Apostle Paul. It was really fascinating. Fascinating study in how he views himself.
Well, that's somebody who was at one time on the same side of things with Jordan Hall. And over time, he realized that Jordan Hall is, as many people have termed him, a loose cannon, and that's putting it mildly. This gentleman here named Garrett Mullet wrote an article called Empowering J.D. Hall Hurts Good People and Worthy Causes. He says, never before had I encountered attendees, members, or leaders of a church, past or present, afraid for their physical safety or that of their family after a conflict with a pastor. Yet I have heard such concerns more than once with regards to Jordan and his church, and so have I. And it's not difficult to sympathize with that fear. The ever-present contempt is obvious. Yet such is the nature of the intimidation that people are afraid to confront or oppose Jordan, to hold him accountable for his treatment of the truth and of people. Whatever Jordan's personal spiritual alignment, that dynamic is certainly of the devil. It speaks volumes when more than one person, several people, are afraid for their physical safety or that of their family. And as Garrett has heard, as I have heard, there are many people who, after dealing with Jordan, echo those sentiments. Why? Why? There's a reason why. And we are going to start with something of a bombshell. Pulpit and Pen Insider tells all. Former Pulpit and Pen Insider. I was contacted by a former Pulpit and Pen Insider who has disclosed all of this information to me. Now, unfortunately for many people, most of this isn't going to be surprising. It will confirm very valid suspicions, but it's not going to be particularly surprising for those who have seen or interacted with J.D. Hall or Pulpit and Pen to any degree. For those of you who maybe don't know about him, of course, the problem that's being highlighted here is that while Jordan Hall is a smaller fish in a bigger pond, there are bigger names and bigger spheres of influence like Justin Peters or Phil Johnson or Todd Friel that give credence to this behavior, that countenance this behavior, and therefore give it power, rather than exposing it, reproving it, repudiating it utterly. It makes them complicit. But let's hear from somebody who has firsthand inside information. So it begins. Although the term whistleblower has become commonplace today, I find that it's an appropriate term for who I am and for the following reasons. As the former chief editor and administrator of Pulpit and Pen, and as an administrator on 3 of Jordan Hall's Facebook pages and Pulpit and Pen's related closed Facebook group, The Pulpit Bunker, I know Pulpit and Pen's behind-the-scenes operation and personally possess the evidentiary documentation on the what goes on behind closed doors. Intriguing already. For example, documentation of the use of manipulative and inappropriate language, the requirement for all Pulpit and Pen staff to sign a confidentiality non-disclosure agreement. By the way, Stephen Furtick does this sort of thing. And the deceptive means used to engage others on behalf of Jordan Hall's agenda at Pulpit and Pen. This list is not by any means exhaustive. 2. When the hypocrisy, partnering with false teachers, manipulation, boasting, greed, and the overt use of cult-like demands from closed Facebook group members became apparent after working closely with J.D. Hall short of 2 years, I resigned on my own accord. 3. Early this year, Jordan Hall hired an individual with expertise in website development with the intent to increase Pulpit and Pen's market share on a variety of social media platforms. Shortly after the individual was hired, I discovered that he was and continues assisting in an ecumenical documentary on Marxism and the Visible Church. For approximately the last 6 months, I've been researching this film project. I questioned their motives and why they contacted me. As I have made it clear to many, I don't ever want to be somebody's personal bulldog, and even if I have some personal aversion to someone, I don't ever want to accuse anybody of something they're not guilty of. I mean that sincerely. My personal preference for a person is not the basis for truth, and I don't ever want to blur those lines personally. And so I asked them what their motives were and what more they could tell me, specifically. And they continue, rather, my motive was to provide the visible church, and specifically the followers of Jordan Hall and the readership of Pulpit and Pen, that the Rolex of polemics and Jordan Hall, in their own words, are in actuality a great danger to the body of Christ and the cross of Christ. With this, I agree. Fourthly, I am in agreement that many individuals are exposed to the leaven of Pulpit and Pen. Beware the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod. Through the reading of one lone article, for reasons that lie not only in the motives and agenda of Pulpit and Pen, but sometimes also in what the reader himself or herself is seeking. Before and after I emailed you, I have continued diligently to search sacred writ for wisdom, pray and seek wise counsel from godly men who demonstrate the fruit of the Spirit in their conduct and instruction in righteousness, to know the will of God, to include God's means and timing in this circumstance. During the year 2018, troubling circumstances presented themselves that I had not been privy to in the past or had not identified. Some of those things include, but are not limited to, pay attention here, 1. Soliciting administrators and authors to create anonymous profiles to harass individuals on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram that disagreed with Jordan Hall personally, or articles posted on Pulpit and Pen to create controversy to increase readership. This is yellow journalism. This is, tabloid tactics. 2, the use of deception to persuade administrators and authors to participate in activities they otherwise would not participate in if they'd known the facts and or truth. 3, false representation of a book project to solicit donations. I don't know if this book was ever published, but according to them, it was a false representation of a book project. 4, employing an individual who is a participant and solicitor of funds for an unbiblical spiritual partnership, which includes false teachers. False teachers that Pulpit and Pen regularly writes against, the staggering hypocrisy. And those who worship false gods in a production of a film on the social gospel, also known today as the social justice gospel. It looks like they meant to put 5 here. They wrote 4 twice. 5. It should be 5. Engaging and encouraging in the use of corrupt and vulgar language in private administrative meetings regarding individuals that Jordan Hall has deemed enemies of himself and or Pulpit and Pen. And again, unfortunately for anyone familiar with Jordan Hall or Pulpit and Pen, this isn't particularly surprising. It doesn't come as a shock that someone of his caliber would be engaged in and encouraging in this type of behavior. They continue, among many reasons, my resignation was given after over a year of providing biblically sound refutation, both private, direct communication to Jordan Hall and private messaging administrative groups, of the ways and means, such as purposefully orchestrating controversies on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram in order to increase ad revenue by increasing readership of Pulpit and Pen, used by Jordan Hall. Finding out that both Jordan Hall and a specific employee at Pulpit and Pen had lied falsely and falsely represented themselves to deceive me, fellow administrators, and members of the closed Facebook group named the Pulpit Bunker. Regarding the firing of the employee, planned and executed deception of both Jordan Hall and the employee. Excuse me. In order to maintain my continuance as chief editor of Pulpit and Pen, and to quench the questions some members had of the Pulpit Bunker, some members of the Pulpit Bunker were privately asking regarding the unbiblical spiritual partnership the employee has with false teachers, etc. They continue, in essence, I had come to the ultimate conclusion that Jordan Hall is both a deceiver and deceived. Indeed, I agree. Now notice they said here, purposefully orchestrating controversies on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram in order to increase ad revenue by increasing readership of Pulpit and Pen. And this is something many people have observed. Jordan Hall is constantly engaged in rabble-rousing behavior, which we'll see more of. It is a constant and habitual engagement in controversies and yellow journalism. And the man will be his own undoing, and already has been. You're witnessing and have been, if anybody's paying attention, the downfall of Jordan Hall. It's not just this Pulpit and Pen insider, though this is very telling stuff, and at least confirms what many people already basically knew to be the case. But I have also spoken with former members of his church that corroborated these behavioral defects that he is controlling that heavy shepherding is engaged in at this church. And there are testimonies upon testimonies all over the internet. I commend you to look for them. But for example, I spoke with one woman who was a member of his church years ago who said that though some of these things sound trivial, she said they appear to be symptomatic of a bigger problem. Things like on a camping trip one time, his wife had to put the tent up because he wouldn't do it. She said at his son's birthday party that his wife had to man the grill because Jordan Hall wouldn't do it. She said that they had a function where all of the other men were stacking the chairs after the function, and it was an activity that Jordan Hall deemed beneath him and wouldn't help. She described him as a lazy man. These were her words. She said he also tried to strongly urge, if not force, her family to use the same homeschool curriculum that he and his family were using. And she said it was just this constant desire for control. And while her husband, apparently now ex-husband, who was having many affairs on her when she told him of this, he was more interested in talking about their homeschool curriculum and so forth. She said that they just didn't care. And so the men that are around him, which many people have attested to, they are yes men, and they must be. Anyone who disagrees with Jordan is pushed out of the congregation. And so she said he got his start as a vacuum cleaner salesman, door-to-door vacuums, which no problem with that. An honest day's work is an honest day's work. But she said he clearly had a good grasp on salesmanship. She described him as nothing more than a salesman who used to tell them that he could have made millions selling vacuum cleaners, but gave all that up to pursue the ministry. And as she put it, it looked like he just found something else to sell. Perhaps himself as a minister or ministerial things. But though he touts himself as someone engaged in polemics, it's not polemics that particularly interest Jordan Hall. It's tabloid journalism. It's yellow journalism. It's salacious things, according to this insider, that are designed to drum up readership and thereby ad revenue. This is all very telling stuff. But that's Jordan Hall, who is supported and promoted by men like Justin Peters, by Chris Rosebrough, by Phil Johnson, by Todd Friel. Now one must ask themselves, are those men or their respective ministries using similar tactics as are used at Pulpit and Pen? Do they know about these things? The reason they are together and countenance each other is because they are of like mind. And that is undeniable. As Todd Friel put it with Michael Brown regarding the people that he conferences with, he says, Michael does conferences with these people. It seems to me Michael is these people. But remember what this man said. Never before had I encountered members or attendees of a church or church leaders afraid for their physical safety or that of their family after a conflict with a pastor, until he heard of Jordan Hall. The Braxton Canner tragedy. I wonder how many people are aware of the Braxton Canner tragedy. I suspect not as many as should be. A few years back, Jordan, no stranger to controversy, got in an altercation with a verbal altercation with this boy's father, Ergen Canner, and at some point decided to target his 15-year-old son in a relentless slew of online attacks, which most people termed as bullying and harassment. And a few weeks later, 15-year-old Braxton Canner killed himself. Baptist preacher fought with Braxton Canner on Twitter, then apologized weeks before the teen's suicide. A Baptist preacher with an extensive history of attacking Bruton Parker College president Ergen Canner expressed regret for engaging Canner's 15-year-old son Braxton in a heated and viral Twitter conflict over Braxton's character and its reflection on his family just weeks before he committed suicide last Tuesday. J.D. Hall, the Baptist preacher and radio host who clashed with the Canners, also admitted that it was a sinful decision to spread a rumor that Ergen Canner and his wife are separated during the Twitter conflagration. That alone should tell you immediately the nature and character of this man, who has no scruples, who shared a rumor about a man being separated from his wife that wasn't true. And when he got caught doing it, of course, he went on to say, "Finally, I gave credence to the rumor in a tweet relating to Canner's marriage, which I should not have mentioned even in passing. That I will go so far as to say is sinful." Well, there's a picture of Braxton Canner's casket. He's dead now. Jordan Hall decided to write an article about the boy, question him about his home life, and even tried to get the boy to contact him privately to speak about his father. This is a 15-year-old kid. You can see in one of his tweets here, and by the way, this Twitter account, this is embedded here in the post. It used to say Jordan Hall at Pulpit and Pen. Protestia did not exist in 2014. So hence the what I can only assess as rebranding. What was once the Pulpit and Pen Twitter account now says Protestia. It appears that Jordan needs a clean slate to try and peddle his wares now, because when people see Pulpit and Pen, they run away. Why is Ergen Canner's son, Braxton Canner, posting make-out pics and profanity on his Twitter? The immorality surrounding Canner is astounding. You need to understand, Jordan had no interest in this child. He didn't care about any of this. This was a disingenuous excuse to attack the man's father. As James White said, Jordan Hall will go low. He has no limits. As the Pulpit and Pen insider said, he uses deceptive and devious means, unbiblical to the core. That is the character, or lack thereof, of Jordan Hall. So at one point, Braxton told him, "You have a creepy obsession with my father. Leave it alone." The kid tried to bow out, and Jordan Hall and his pulpiteers and his ragtag group of followers just kept on harassing the kid, and a few weeks later, he was dead. Do you and your siblings and your dad speak Arabic as a first language at home? Now, people that were reading this exchange started to call Jordan Hall out on this. One person says, "Was right with you up until you dragged the family in. An apology is in order, brother." The only thing wrong with this statement is referring to Jordan Hall as a brother. And I don't say that lightly. Jordan Hall is a reprobate. It's even hard to call it sheep's clothing at this point. He's a wolf who's taking the clothing off. And yet somehow Justin Peters, Todd Friel, Chris Rosebrough, Phil Johnson all partnered with Jordan Hall after this happened. One responder, Paul, asserted, "Let me get this right. You're not his parent. You are not his pastor. You are not his friend. You have no invested interest in this child. You don't even know this teen. You spent time searching and reading the Twitter feed of a 15-year-old, which is not necessarily considered a public venue. You decided his picture and tweets were inappropriate. You engaged another man's 10th grade son in conversation online. You asked a 15-year-old to private message you so you can correspond with him about his father. You also stated that his mother and father are separated, which is a blatant lie. You have no God-given authority over this child in any way, and you want a book, chapter, verse to inform you this action was at best inappropriate, which is the opposite approach of someone who supposedly embraces the regulative principle. It's not surprising to me you did this. It is typical JD and generates more publicity for you and your radio program. But I'm somewhat surprised how quickly a few people came to your defense and tried to justify it. For someone who loves to call people to repentance, you sure have a tough time acknowledging when you cross the line. Boy, is that an understatement. This article says, and by the way, all of these articles I will link in the description so you can read them all in their entirety, if you so choose. After Washington State licensed mental health therapist Kathleen Shannon became aware of J.D. Hall's bullying the 15-year-old Canner and his subsequent suicide, she became livid, and understandably so. Shannon was clear concerning both Seth Dunn, one of Jordan Hall's friends, and Hall's behavior, dubbing their attacks against the Canner family, quote, inhumane and not intellectually respectable, end quote. She called them inhumane, and she's right. While the family was experiencing complicated grief, she further indicated that Hall's tagging his and Dunn's insensitive rhetoric with hashtag Braxton's List made, quote, mockery of a tragedy in which he took part, end quote. What a damning indictment that is. Mockery of a tragedy in which he took part, she said. And after this, as somebody put it, Jordan issued some kind of statement, which many dubbed some apology, where he was talking about how crushed he was that this happened and how he regretted interacting with the teen in that fashion. And he didn't think he was responsible, but he still regretted what he did. And somebody said, it sounds like this is a man who recognized that he was in a hair's breadth of losing his income, the public backlash. So insincere was this so-called apology, one person wrote, frankly, reading the text of this carefully crafted apology, I cannot imagine any rational Christian person not storming out of the church and never coming back. I cannot imagine anyone who has the spiritual discernment of a babe in Christ not seeing through to the sociopath. It screams out loud from this apology. This apology is remarkable in its similarity to those of Mark Driscoll. Some of you might know what they're referencing. 1. It is self-aggrandizing, calling attention to the greatness of the one apologizing. He informs his flock how the name J.D. Hall is a household name, how he has been fighting the good fight, gaining fame across the continent. It is judgmental, calling attention to the evil and wickedness of his detractors, even a dead boys. It's self-interested and maudlin, calling attention to J.D.'s own poor self in this matter. The toll the battle was taking on me, my aging, my family, my sanity, my stress. 4, it's deceptive. He doesn't quite tell the truth and the whole truth about his interaction with Braxton. Note what he leaves out. The third and last comment I made directly to him was that because of his age, I would discontinue the conversation, but that he could email me if he felt so led at a later time to seek or speak the truth. Go back to the actual Twitter exchange to see how JD subtly but importantly twisted the truth by omission. 5. It's all about me, me, me. He cannot get away from himself. He keeps looping back to what this all means for him. See the above under me, my. See also, I am broken. I am unequivocally, completely broken. I am crushed. I'm a crushed man. My spirit is crushed. I am sorrowful. I am hurting. This has forever changed me in more ways than I can currently comprehend. This is not in any meaningful way an apology. It is the treatise of a sociopath in the form of an apology, says Truth Detector. Wow. Someone else went on to talk about the psychological projection that Jordan Hall is often apparently engaged in, calling other people, accusing them of carelessly berating after he attacked Jordan Cooper's wife in a Twitter exchange, something he does often. He goes after people's families. If anyone is a ceaseless berater, I made that word up, it would be J.D. Hall. Just ask Ergen Canner. You can't ask Ergen Canner's son Braxton, he's dead. J.D. Hall tweeted a few times to Braxton in a condescending fashion, which then brought a group of tweeters who ganged up on Braxton. Braxton clearly indicated that he was done, but men continued hounding him about his lifestyle as a teenager, the way his girlfriend dressed, etc. Within weeks of this incident, Braxton committed suicide. They go on to say, is there a reason why I posted the photo of the Reformation Montana conference? Right here. Phil Johnson, Todd Friel, Chris Rosebrough, J.D. Hall. You bet. It is commonly known that J.D. Hall behaves like a bully on Twitter, yet those public Christian leaders don't seem to have a problem associating with him and speaking at his events. That includes Justin Peters. So they say, these men, if they cared about Christ's reputation, would have nothing to do with J.D. Hall. Remaining silent is being complicit. And they're right. Back to Garrett Mullet's article on Jordan Hall here. In a previous article, he says, I referred to Jordan as a bully. He was someone who took overt, visible pleasure in making others uncomfortable. I also said he used bold assertions of just causes as a pretext for attacking people, which he does. This is what makes him particularly dangerous, is he will rally behind a cause you might sympathize with, but it's a pretext to attack somebody else or to assert himself. After this, Jordan Hall contacted him, upset that anybody contradicted him. He says that some of the feedback was positive from locals. Good for me for standing up to that guy. One of the elders of the church I was serving at as a deacon back then thanked me. He added that J.D. Hall was a, quote, loose cannon, and he worried for years that someone was going to get hurt. This is another deacon, another individual, told him, I'm worried somebody's going to get hurt. Why is everybody worried like that? Because he's right. Jordan Hall is a loose cannon. On the other hand, a former leader in J.D. Hall's church called me up to tell me I had been too generous. Hall was a glory seeker, angry with God for not having made him famous yet. Jordan's stunt at the Dickinson Church was just another desperate attempt to grab headlines for himself. Hall was more a minister of Satan than of God, he said. That's a former leader at his church. And I've heard this from several people. You can see the striving. Jordan Hall has his hands in all sorts of stuff. He started Pulpit and Pen, and now he's got Protestia, and he had the Polemics Report, and at one point he had a Voice in the Wilderness radio he was going to start, and then he announced a few months ago he was going to leave Pulpit and Pen to start writing at the Montana Daily Gazette, I think it was, and then apparently he gave up on that and came back to Pulpit and Pen. And he's got the Gideon Knox group, and he ran for a House seat in Montana, and he's just striving. Right, he's frequently accused me of purchasing YouTube subscribers and purchasing views and so forth. This is utterly false. I didn't even know you could do that until Jordan Hall accused me of that. It's never even crossed my mind. The reason it was on Jordan's mind is because it has crossed his mind. And according to the Pulpit and Pen Insider, Jordan Hall accuses people of things that he's already researched, the tools that are in his arsenal, as it was put. So Jordan Hall would know if you could purchase views. Apparently that's something that he's probably looked into. But as this former leader in his church said, he's angry with God for not having made him famous yet. Jordan is somewhat famous, infamous. The infamous Jordan Hall. Garrett continues here. That J.D. Hall was linked up with a group of Richland County Republicans. He said, I implore reconsideration on 3 points, he's telling them. Namely, you are 1, undermining these causes by putting this man at your fore. 2, hurting your own reputation and credibility by associating with him. 3, empowering a man who should not be in any kind of leadership, but moreover needs to take himself in hand before he presumes to grandstand and lecture others on their inferior moral and spiritual condition. In case it's not clear enough, I'll put it in simpler language. Don't feed the troll. And so he finally says, J.D. Hall claims authority in the civic and political realm by touting his supposed spiritual bona fides. And his supporters look at his bold platform at Fellowship Baptist Church in Sydney, Montana. They read his articles on Pulpit and Pen, and they conclude such things prove his courage and quality, but they don't. J.D. Hall's Christianity is just an excuse to bully people. The church just so happens to occupy a dimension in which he thinks he can get away with it. And he thinks he can get away with it because men like Justin Peters, Todd Friel, Phil Johnson of Grace to You, and Chris Rosebrough let him get away with it and encourage him. Partner with him. One of the men that came to Jordan's defense after Braxton Canner killed himself was none other than Chris Rosebrough. Fighting for the faith or fighting for his friends? It's hard to tell. He says, it's really upsetting to see Jordan Hall's name being dragged through the mud. That anybody could say Jordan Hall's name could be dragged through the mud as if he himself weren't dragging it through the mud is an astounding statement. And the reason Chris Rosebrough defends Jordan Hall is because Chris Rosebrough is like Jordan Hall. They are friends because they are like-minded. He continues down here. And like I said, if, you're a 15-year-old kid and somebody comes at you and you're thinking, oh, that guy's creepy and that's weird and what's his problem kind of thing, and then later that guy apologizes to you, that doesn't make you want to commit suicide. It makes you feel like you're vindicated. I'll have to ask Chris Rosebrough one of the silly arguments he so often employs, which is, do you have the ability to divine Braxton Canner's thoughts or motives or intentions? Is Chris Rosebrough claiming psychic powers? But in the midst of this tragedy, Chris Rosebrough attempts to justify Jordan Hall's actions or trivialize them and to act like there could possibly be no correlation between the events, like he has absolute knowledge. That doesn't make you want to kill yourself. That makes you feel vindicated. Chris Rosebrough defends Jordan Hall because he is like him. And this has led to fallouts in Chris Rosebrough's own personal world. Jordan Cooper, whose wife Lisa Cooper was attacked by Jordan on Twitter, is a fellow Lutheran pastor who left Chris Rosebrough's Pirate Christian Radio because of his friendship and partnership with Jordan Hall. He says here, there are multiple ministries which Chris supports in one way or another that I personally find to be harmful. A clear example of this is Pulpit and Pen, whose leader recently attacked my wife on a public forum, and not for the first time. Chris, though disagreeing with these actions, presumably in private, remains attached to this group in one way or another and speaks at the annual Reformation Montana conference. He says, at this point, I cannot in good conscience be a part of Pirate Christian Radio due to some of these connections. I find Pulpit and Pen to be as dangerous, and perhaps more so, than many of the groups which are critiqued on fighting for the faith. And that is a massive statement, because the groups that are critiqued on fighting for the faith include people like Cindy Jacobs and, the NAR and Benny Hinn and so forth. And Jordan Cooper was absolutely right. Jordan Hall, I believe, is more dangerous than even those overt false teachers, partly because he says things that are true and contradicts those false teachers. And as you can see, the man is clearly a reprobate, clearly disqualified from ministry. And yet, despite all that, Chris Rosebrough and Jordan Hall are very good friends, again, because they are like-minded. Here is J.D. Hall in front of Chris Rosebrough's Pirate Christian car. Here is J.D. Hall and Chris Rosebrough preaching together at some conference. So you understand, if you didn't already, a little bit about who and what Jordan Hall is. A man who pretends to be a godly minister, but a man who is clearly lost and has no business, as Garrett Mullet put it. He shouldn't be leading anything. I agree. He shouldn't be leading a Cub Scout troop. But who is Chris Rosebrough? Well, you know something about his character already. He's a friend of Jordan Hall's, and that should tell you a lot. He's a partner in ministry of Jordan Hall's, and that should tell you a lot. But so is Justin Peters. So is Todd Friel. So is Phil Johnson. And they're all partners of Chris Rosebrough, who, in addition to being friends and countenancing and promoting men like Jordan Hall, is also an idolater, a glaring one. And there he is preaching in front of his Jesus statue, which, by the way, doesn't even have nail marks in his arms or hands. No stigmata at all. It would be disturbing if there was a statue at all, but this is a false representation of Christ, even in that sense. And I just say that in passing, because even Lutherans, and if you're a Lutheran watching this, even Lutherans who agree with this, are going to be utterly disturbed by what they see here in a moment. To understand Chris Rosebrough, we need some more context. His son Joshua, unlike Braxton Canner, for example, is part of Chris's ministry and also is a grown man. Joshua Rosebrough here on the PirateChristian.com website is the C artist. He's listed under the heading Deckhands, which includes all of Chris's family. You could see his Facebook page read, producer, director at Pirate Christian Media, Joshua Rosebrough. He's not just Chris's son or Chris's wayward son, but he is a partner and co-laborer in ministry endeavors, and we'll get a word directly from Chris Rosebrough about this. Listen. This is just from a little over a week ago, I think.
Of course, standing in also is Joshua Rosebrough, video editor and mastermind behind all the evil things we do here at Fighting for the Faith. Mastermind behind all the evil things we do here at Fighting for the Faith. All the evil things we do here.
All the evil things we do here at Fighting for the Faith. He says Joshua is the mastermind. I think the truth may have slipped out there. Of course, he would say it was said in jest. Well, many a truth are said in jest. Josh Rosebrough is not just Chris's son, some guy off to the side, but as he put it, is the mastermind behind all the evil things they do there at Fighting for the Faith. He is a part of that ministry, and therefore a co-laborer, and therefore the relationship between Chris and Joshua Rosebrough is more akin to that of Eli and his sons in 1 Samuel. Eli, far from doing what he could to stop the wickedness his sons were doing, confronted his sons, but didn't fully restrain them, and God judged him along with his sons for that. Well, I put a warning here because there's going to be some vulgar words that appear on the screen. I won't read them, but they will be there, and I will reference them if you don't want to see them, or you don't want somebody around you to see them. Just be warned that for the next few seconds, we're going to see that. This is Joshua Rosebrough's personal Facebook page, and these are things that he has posted in less than the last year. The dates are on them, I think from June of 2020 and so forth. These are things that have happened recently while he's been an active part of his father's ministry, a professed Christian and a grown man of 30-plus years age. Here's what Josh Rosebrough is up to on Facebook. He talks about dumpster weasels, your dumb A politics, BLM doesn't know jack SH about history. Somebody said, now that's my kind of effing party, to which Josh Rosebrough says based, which is a slang term that means he likes it. That's denoting approval. Somebody else says, go F yourself, to this comment, and he supports it and says, we aren't a nation built upon rebellion against tyrants for nothing. So Josh Rosebrough just shares that. And, oh, by the way, this disgusting picture of a scantily clad woman. When Josh Rosebrough's friend shared that with him, he thought it was funny. He didn't say that's inappropriate. He didn't delete it. He laughed at it. Now, although I have my own questions, maybe we can get a question from Jordan Hall of Pulpit and Pen. Remember what he asked Ergen and Braxton Canner? Here's a picture of that original screenshot tweet. Why is Ergen Canner's son posting makeout pics and profanity on his Twitter? The immorality surrounding Canner is astounding. Well, if Jordan Hall is astounded that a 15-year-old kid who was not a part of his father's ministry was posting profanity on his Twitter and makeout pics, then he should be completely flabbergasted at the immorality surrounding Chris Rosebrough, given that his son posts stuff like this, and like this, and like this, and like that. Will Jordan Hall ever say anything about Chris Rosebrough and his wayward son? I suspect not. Because not unlike the mafia, they protect their own. It's arbitrary. Jordan Hall was never interested in Braxton Canner or concerned that real immorality was taking place or leading others astray or, defiling the name of God. It was all about sticking it to Ergen Canner. So, perhaps the next article Pulpit and Pen writes should have something to do with Josh Rosebrough and his apparent habitual vulgarity. This is the stuff that he posts openly, publicly. He just casually posts this on his public Facebook page. Can you imagine what he does private? If this is what he thinks is acceptable in public, not even a filter or a sense of what might be deemed as appropriate, not even an effort to suppress it, what does he do and say in private? Good question. Well, we know he's the mastermind behind all the evil things they do there at Fighting for the Faith, according to Chris Rosebrough. They are two peas in a proverbial pod. And also in that pod would include J.D. Hall and Justin Peters and Todd Friel and Phil Johnson. But it only gets worse from there. If you think you're astounded at the immorality surrounding Chris Rosebrough now, let's talk about the mocking of a man with mental illness, or was it gaslighting a man who didn't have mental illness? Either way, it's bad. What you're going to see here is one of two things. It is either one of the grossest displays of mocking I have ever seen, or one of the grossest displays of gaslighting I have ever seen. In either event, it is utterly disqualifying for Chris Rosebrough. The American Association of Lutheran Churches has an obligation to address this behavior publicly before men and the God they claim to serve. Because if they countenance behavior like this, what else are they countenancing that we don't know about? As a man who claims to be a pastor and one who claims to be fighting for the faith, it's going to become more apparent why he associates himself with pirates at the Pirate Christian Radio. Either this man really does have a mental illness, in which case Chris and his son are mocking him to the tune of 13 times, there's a tally counter at the top, or they are gaslighting him into thinking he has a mental illness when he doesn't. Now, somebody posted this some months back, and a privacy claim was filed against it that Chris says he didn't do, but his daughter did. And since her name is publicly available on his website, I'll say it. Her name is Christina. And he says that she filed the copyright or the privacy claim because her son's face was visible in the video. Well, I've edited that out. And in fact, I've blurred out all the faces except for Chris Rosebrough and Joshua Rosebrough, both public figures who are on camera frequently, and the police officer who's there. And just some context, apparently his daughter was in the middle of a divorce, and she was going to collect her things from the home, and a police officer is there to supervise. And according to the gentleman filming, Chris Rosebrough and or Josh Rosebrough were the ones that called the police officer. I don't know what happened for her to be divorced, but I'm just giving you the context. That's why the officer is there. Pay attention. 13 times they mock this man for having a mental illness, as they put it.
How are you doing, Chris? Santiago, how are you?
You're mentally ill. I'm sorry, we have nothing to say to you. You need to get treatment for your illness. All of this?
Oh wow, it's just random little things.
Alright.
Okay, goodbye.
That's all. You're mentally deranged. You need help.
Insult to injury. Good for you.
That's funny. You tried to blackmail my daughter in order to come to a wedding you weren't invited to.
Blackmail?
Yeah, that's
Oh,
right.
really, Chris? If you want to sit and talk, we can talk. But I have no interest in discourse
Sorry,
currently.
Stephen. You're mentally ill.
I'm not mentally ill,
Yeah,
Chris.
you are.
No, I'm not.
You're
Please leave
mentally
my
ill.
presence.
You're
You're getting your
mentally
stuff.
ill.
Get out of my house.
You're mentally
Get
ill.
out of my house. You know what makes me the most angry about this whole situation, officer? That they call the police and they lie about me to get them to come out anyways. Have a good day, officer. Who's driving?
Yet for your mental illness, Stephen?
What is it, Chris?
You get treatment for your mental illness yet?
Have you learned to be a Christian yet? I don't think so.
You're not getting
Bye,
treatment
Ben.
for your
I
mental
love
illness
you.
yet? You're not getting treatment?
You know you tried to send me to get...
You need to get
You don't even want to have a conversation, do you, Chris?
It's degenerative.
Yeah, and you need to stop being a narcissist, Chris.
I'm not.
Good luck with that.
Wow. If you're not disgusted by that, absolutely disgusted, you probably need to do some self-reflection yourself. That is one of the more egregious and absolutely disgusting displays of either mocking or gaslighting I've ever heard. Again, if the man has a real mental illness, what you just heard was antagonistic mocking by a man who is sponsored by the American Association of Lutheran Churches. If he really has a mental illness, mocking him, it's degenerative, Stephen. You're not getting treatment, Stephen. You're mentally ill, Stephen. Between him and his son, 13 times they said that to this guy. And if he doesn't have a mental illness, then what were they doing? Manipulating him. Manipulating him. A man who claims to be a pastor. This is shocking. And it needs to be addressed by the American Association of Lutheran Churches, and I hope somebody presents this to them and asks them some more questions. But it only gets worse from here. How could it be any worse, you might ask yourself, Josh? So they mock this man. And as you heard him say there, he didn't complete what he was saying, but listen carefully.
You know you tried to send me to get...
He said, you tried to send me to get... What was he going to say? Did Chris Rosebrough try to send this guy somewhere? Was he so harping on the mental illness bandwagon that he tried to send the guy somewhere? That's what it sounds like he was about to say. This is disgusting and disqualifying. And yet, Justin Peters is a ministry partner of Chris Rosebrough. Todd Friel, there he is, doing ministry events with Chris Rosebrough and Phil Johnson. Phil Johnson, a friend of Chris Rosebrough. But you know what? You shouldn't be surprised. Because when push comes to shove, Phil Johnson employs the same tactics. Phil Johnson of Grace to You, right-hand man of John MacArthur. If you dare question him or his family, so to speak, that's where he'll take it. Listen to this Twitter exchange. I'm told Dornick gave the keys to the Goatkeeper Twitter account to Mr. Detweiler, and he's the one who claimed he's been up close and personal with me. Note, I've never met him either. I stand by my comments and concerns about the GK gang and the mental health of their ringleaders. Does he really have a concern about their mental health, or is he just a gaslighting liar like his friend Chris Rosebrough? When somebody disagrees with them about John MacArthur or dares to question their anointed one, that's where they go. I question the mental health of their ringleaders. These people argue like the people that they critique generally. The Word of Faith groupies and the NAR followers, When a Benny Hinn type is critiqued, they employ the same type of emotional arguments. You don't touch our anointed. And that's what these men do to protect their own. They're no different. It's just a different crime family, as it were. I stand by my concerns about the GK gang and the mental health of their ringleaders. Well, now you can see a little better why Chris and Phil and Jordan are all friends and all promote each other. They are of the same mind. They employ the same tactics, and they do it under the banner of Christ as ministers of God. Spiritual abuse? You betcha. And Justin Peters and Todd Friel support it all. Not once have they contradicted any of this. But it only gets worse. What else? What else indeed? Remember, I really just hope and pray there is not another innocent girl victimized. What are we talking about here? Who is this innocent girl, and how was she victimized? Well, I'll tell you who the girl wasn't. It wasn't Joshua Rosebrough's second wife. It was his first wife that they are speaking about. Here is a picture of Joshua Rosebrough and his second wife in front of his father's Jesus statue. Here's another picture of Joshua Rosebrough and his second wife in the grass. Remember, he's the mastermind behind all the evil things they do there at Fighting for the Faith. And according to that last comment, the girl in question that was innocent and victimized was his first wife. Now, though this was said about Jordan Hall, you'll see how this applies to Chris Rosebrough and Josh Rosebrough, and even Jordan Hall. And since they're friends, it should be no surprise. But here's what James White said about Jordan Hall. Listen.
Now, by the way, I'm going to title this program A Study in Projection. Projection is where you project onto others the things you yourself are doing. What you're going to hear is me being accused of everything that JD does. So a bunch of the things he's going to say that he's going to drag out are things that he has absolutely decided. He is extremely focused upon being right.
All the things J.D. Hall accuses James White of, he's guilty of. You're going to see that Chris Rosebrough and his son Joshua, not to mention Jordan Hall, have all either directly accused me or given credence to accusations against me about things that apparently they themselves are guilty of. That's how it seems. That's how it looks. Some of these things, pay attention. Setting the record straight. Joshua Rosebrough, Chris Rosebrough's son, wrote a blog called Setting the Record Straight. Now, as you can see from the opening line there, due to the continued slander, harassment, and cyber stalking of myself, my father, and my family, I've decided to come forward to set the record straight regarding the circumstances surrounding my divorce from my first wife. Interesting. Now, again, I'm going to put the links to all of this in the description because this is a very long article. There are legal documents, correspondences, etc., far too long to read. So I'm going to give you the overview of what is in this article, and we'll read a couple of brief quotes. But the story, in essence, is this. He was in the Navy at the time. He says he had been married for about 9 months, and he was struggling with some besetting sin. And he was overcome with guilt, and he decided to confess this sin to his wife. So he did. And then he said the following day, or shortly thereafter, his wife was on her way to go visit her parents, and he was out on his first deployment for a couple of months. And he said during that time, right, there's a big gap in the story. In fact, there's a lot of gaps or holes in this article. Please read it for yourself. It goes from that to his wife started sending harassing and vitriolic emails to his commanders, which he didn't find out about until later. They didn't tell him about this. He said to his surprise, they took him off the boat early on Mother's Day, May 8th, and then he was given some leave to go address marital struggles. But he only spoke with his wife a couple of times, and his commanders and eventually his in-laws demanded that he stop contacting her at all, and then they demanded that he sign annulment papers because they had been defrauded, or had they believed that a fraud had been perpetrated against them. There's something missing in between there. The big thing that's missing is what was the nature of this thing that he confessed, because it completely matters. The impression that's given is that all of the sudden she kind of overreacted and started sending these harassing emails, and out of nowhere they started slandering him, and we'll read what the in-laws accused him of. These are very, very specific accusations. But his father-in-law contacted Chris Rosebrough, apparently, and he says, when my father asked that he explain what the truth was, my father-in-law proceeded to claim that I was a homosexual and had had homosexual relations with a shipmate who was stationed with me at the naval base in Groton, Connecticut. He also claimed that this homosexual affair had resulted in that fellow getting a divorce, and that through this homosexual relationship I had contracted an STD. He also claimed that I had sexual deviancy syndrome and that I could only enjoy sex if I were inflicting pain on my partner. Furthermore, he claimed that my father and mother were fully aware of all these alleged problems that I had, and that they had willfully withheld that information from my wife and her family during our courtship, and by so doing had perpetrated a fraud on them. Again, I will point out these are very specific allegations that would be very easily falsifiable. So I'm having a difficult time comprehending why the father-in-law would accuse him of having a homosexual affair with a man who got a divorce as a result, and then he contracted an STD. It would be pretty easy to say, no, that man is still married. What are you talking about? But nevertheless, this is what he says they allege. Of course, he denies this, and if you read through the article, he further says that they accused Chris Rosebrough of finding money that Joshua Rosebrough had saved up for gender reassignment surgery when he was 17 years old, which, of course, he says is crazy. That never happened. Why would they say that? Then he accused them of trying to gaslight his father, which I found ironic given the interaction we saw with Chris and Joshua Rosebrough and the man they claimed had a mental illness. What happened here? It's really difficult to tell, but something happened. And the catalyst for this something happening was the confession of some besetting sin, as he put it, from Josh Rosebrough. Now, Chris Rosebrough does go on to ask in deposition format, really, the in-laws a series of questions. And among those questions are, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he says something like, have you read the deposition from the sailor who Josh supposedly had an affair with or supposedly contracted an STD from, and have you personally spoken to his ex-wife? Something of that nature. It's a very interesting question because it almost seems to give credence to or imply that there is an ex-wife. Otherwise, why would that question be asked? If there was no ex-wife, why would you ask about an ex-wife that wasn't? In other words, why wouldn't you just say, we know the man who you're talking about, and that's absurd. He is still married. What are you talking about? But to ask about the ex-wife and the deposition seems to imply that there was a deposition of some kind. So I don't know what to make of that question, but it's very peculiarly worded, to say the least. So a very specific set of allegations from his in-laws. And they all stopped talking. Now, of course, this escalated. They were writing this stuff online, which Josh Rosebrough describes like this. Not only is this the gossip you've heard, Not only is the gossip that you've heard nothing more than a slanderous pile of lies, the people who've been spreading those lies are unaccountable, refuse to be held accountable, and are instead ruthless, heartless, merciless, unloving, lawless, and more akin to Satan, who is the accuser of the saints and whose native language is lies. He concludes with, or pretty near the end, I sorrowfully filed for divorce knowing that I had biblical grounds to do so due to my wife's abandonment of the marriage. So his narrative and the way he's framed this is that he wanted to work things out and she just abandoned the marriage, and so he sorrowfully and reluctantly filed for divorce, but he had biblical grounds to do it because she's the one that abandoned the marriage. So that was his setting the record straight. Again, there's a massive gap in the story, which is what was the nature of the thing that he confessed to her? Because it does matter. It matters who actually had biblical grounds for divorce there. And as you're going to see, something doesn't make sense here. Remember, listen to this one. We just paid off the last of our legal fees, and it was worth every dime to send creepy predator pirate dude out of our lives forever. By the way, Chris never sued anyone, never even tried, because he's a bully and a liar, and was just throwing around false accusations and threats like any weak, frightened coward does when their sin is exposed. There was an exchange where Chris told this girl, who was referred to by her family as innocent and victimized, he said, is it going to be worth it to you, to endure a lawsuit? Again, I'm paraphrasing here. Don't you know you're going to waste your parents' money and all this stuff, right? Threatening some lawsuit. And if you read through the article, there was a cease and desist sent and so on and so forth. And as they described it, creepy predator pirate dude is now out of their lives forever after they paid their legal fees. Somebody else says, this is why when I see a pirate flag, I see death. He wiped me out, destroyed my reputation online, and put me in the hospital from stress. He is a bully with the spirit of satanic pride in him, yet Christians continue to hear him flock to him to hear him defend the faith. It'd be hard to distinguish whether they were talking about Chris Rosebrough or Jordan Hall. You can see very similar sentiments directed at both, and that's why they're friends. Like-minded. Somebody responds, agreed. I really just hope and pray there is not another innocent girl victimized down the road. Well, according to Josh Rosebrough, he had biblical grounds for divorce because she abandoned the marriage. Of course, he never does say what this besetting sin was that he was struggling with, but we did see what they accused him of, which he denies. What we're about to see, I'm going to preface by saying, one, the things we're going to see next are newsworthy. Newsworthy because Christopher Rosebrough is a public figure with thousands of followers on YouTube and Twitter. He is a very notable name in the American Assembly or Association of Lutheran Churches. Moreover, he himself has publicly spoken about these events. In an article entitled Breaking the Machine, he references the continued slander and harassment and the lies about his family. He said it was just torturous. His son Joshua Rosebrough, the supposed mastermind of all the evil things they do there at Fighting for the Faith, has also, as we just saw, publicly spoken about this, setting the record straight. And moreover, Chris Rosebrough has sought to and has given credence to provably false statements about me personally. And when you see how eerily similar the allegations against me are as to what the allegations against his son were, you'll see why this is doubly newsworthy, because Chris Rosebrough has continued to try to revive a dead narrative about my personal life. And because of that, you're going to see this is doubly newsworthy. Also, all of these things are protected by fair use, etc. Chris is a public figure and a member of the clergy. And given the statements that they have publicly made regarding his son's marriage and how they've framed it, it's of particular note. Allegedly, what we are going to witness, allegedly, and so that I don't have to keep saying that, just assume that while I'm talking about the entirety of this, I am assuming this allegedly happened. Allegedly, we are going to view a conversation between Christopher Rosebrough and the girl whose family described her as an innocent and victim. An innocent girl who was victimized. Allegedly, we are going to see that correspondence. So I'm not going to keep saying allegedly throughout this, but this was posted publicly on Facebook. Publicly posted for anyone to see. Okay? Allegedly, this is what happened. The girl in question, Joshua Rosebrough's first wife, says, "You do realize that by keeping Josh's problem a secret, you're protecting him from the consequences and dumping his shame on my head. I have no intention of pretending that I left Josh just because the first year was a little harder than I expected. If I'm to pull myself back together, I need to keep my good name. Anything but the truth in this situation seriously taints my name. Secondly, you have to be mindful of your ministry. Being upfront and honest about your son takes the power away from evil, slanderous people who would love nothing more than to destroy your good name. Admitting there's a problem will not affect your ministry. Hiding this will." Almost a prophetic statement at the end there. Hiding this will affect your ministry. And again, I'm presupposing the word allegedly in front of everything I say during this time. Allegedly, Chris Rosebrough responds and says, "You're assuming way too much. It's not your job to air Josh's dirty laundry to the world. And losing his marriage is an extremely severe consequence. You're thinking about yourself and your reputation, making sure that all the blame goes on Josh, but I'm not thinking in terms of blame. I already know Joshua is to blame, but to blame for what? And I'd never tell anyone otherwise. That being said, it is not everybody's business to know all the details of Joshua's sin. And engaging in a scorched earth policy regarding someone's reputation is not in keeping with the gospel, and in this situation is not only cruel, it works against the gospel, true repentance, and reconciliation. What is of particular interest to this statement is that when Chris Rosebrough heard rumors about me that he believed were true, he wanted the entire world to know. And yet when his son, the supposed mastermind of all the evil they do at Fighting for the Faith, when he acknowledges that he is to blame, he doesn't want anybody to know. It is not everybody's business to know all the details of Joshua's sin. Already trying to silence her. Why? Okay. He then sends her the explanation of the 8th commandment in the Lutheran Confession. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we do not tell lies about our neighbor, betray him, slander him, or hurt his reputation, but defend him, speak well of him, and explain everything in the kindest way. That is a complete misapplication even by the Lutheran standard there. Hurting someone's reputation unnecessarily. But speaking the truth, you can see how he's twisting things already. Part of what Joshua needs to do is confess his own sins to his family. It is not your job to air all those sins to everybody. It is a more intense consequence for Joshua to have to answer the questions that people have about his marriage than to have you tell everyone. In fact, telling everyone Josh's sin will make him feel betrayed, and he will then get defensive and want to retaliate in order to save face. I have to ask Chris Rosebrough, is he claiming the ability to divine the thoughts of his son? Is he claiming to have psychic powers here? Because if you read through the Josh Rosebrough Setting the Record Straight article, you will notice that there are about 7 or 8 allegations from the in-laws, and in about 4 or 5 of them, Josh Rosebrough's defense is they're claiming to be able to read my father's mind. It's a common Rosebrough objection. Whenever anybody questions his motive, he says, are you claiming to be a psychic? But look what he does here. In fact, telling everyone Josh's sin will just make him feel betrayed. And then he will get defensive and want to retaliate in order to save face. That would more than likely only drive him further into his sin. He's making Josh out to be the victim now. Remember that Scripture clearly teaches that it's God's kindness that leads us to repentance. It is more convicting on a sinner when he is shown love and mercy and kindness rather than hatred, scorn, and contempt. Here's what the Scripture says. And then he says, repay no one evil for evil, right? He sends a Romans chapter 12. Continuing. If, this is allegedly Chris speaking, if you ever loved Josh, and if you truly want him to come to true repentance and forgiveness for his sins, it is more powerful and more productive for you not to repay his evil with evil and create a revenge cycle. Instead, war against Josh's evil with good, with love, with mercy. And the only way that's going to be possible is for you to understand the true depth and meaning of forgiveness. You're listening to some deep and gross manipulation, folks, if you couldn't discern that for yourselves. Gospel is far more powerful than the law. The law can only thunder and threat, but the gospel is what truly converts a sinner to a saint. He then cites Matthew 18 and the parable of the unjust steward, right? I've forgiven you so much, why shouldn't you forgive those who sin against you? He seems to be making her out to be the problem and his son out to be the victim. There's another verse I would like you to read and consider. Whoever goes about slandering reveals secrets, but he who is trustworthy in spirit keeps a thing covered. She says, and I'm not sure why she says dad here. I don't know if her dad was copied in this thread with them or if she got confused because she is talking to Chris Rosebrough allegedly, so I'm not sure. That's just what it says. What do you suppose or propose I tell my pastor? The board at school, who will need an explanation? My grandparents, my brothers and sisters? What do you propose I tell those who ask? It sounds like he wants her to be quiet completely. There's no retaliation. It's simple. The truth will set you free. If Josh cannot face the truth of what he is and what he's done, he will never repent. I won't consider that Josh has repented unless all pertinent family members understand the situation. What you propose I do sounds more like self-immolation. That's exactly what my mumsy's theologian grandfather told my mother after horribly molesting her for years, and what a certain cult leader tells the girls of his organization after he destroys them. I didn't want any potentially identifying information about them published, so I deleted those names. Notice what she compares what she's hearing to. Her grandfather, who molested her mother, would say similar things to keep her mother quiet. And what cult leaders did in some horribly abusive organization after they destroyed girls to keep them quiet. Self-immolation, she describes this as. Well, you just want me to not say anything? You want me to pretend like I just walked away? And you want me to keep Josh's secret hidden? Wow. She says to not tell the truth about why the marriage is broken takes the blame off of Josh and dumps it on me, the innocent victim. So would you choose to destroy me to save your son? Know that I'm going to handle this delicately. I will not tell. One of the names is actually Chris's wife. I don't know who the other one was, so I blocked it out. But Chris's wife and Josh's mother, her name is known publicly. It's on his website. Her name is Barb. So she said, I will not tell Barb and someone else who I don't know. So I blocked it. I will inform those who are close to me and who are helping me through this. And I will leave you to lie to all concerned on your side of the family if you wish. Do not tell me that I'm sinning because I will not lie. She goes on to say, Something was terribly wrong. I know you, and there's little portions of the conversation that were left out because there's certain things and details people shouldn't see that have to do with her. No sin that she committed, but that are just personal things. She says, something was terribly wrong. I know you're angry, but it never occurred to me that you would expect me to lie, and that's exactly what I would have had to do. My family and inner circle is very different than yours. We are very open and trusting and intimate. I would have had to shut them all out to keep Josh's secret, and that probably would have killed me. I understand your loyalties are with Josh, but I hope you see that harming me is not going to help Josh in the long run. What's done is done, and whatever repercussions come from this fall on Josh's shoulders. Again, you've never known me to be anything but discreet, and I'm certainly not vindictive. Your disapproval is misplaced. But remember how she was painted by Josh Rosebrough and even Chris Rosebrough in his Breaking the Machine article. Go read it. I'll put links to them. They describe the people that are alleging this as vindictive, a pile of slanderous lies, blackmailers, revilers, liars, akin to Satan, right? That's not how this reads at all. She says, I'm certainly not vindictive. Your disapproval is misplaced. Then he says, which outcome do you want to have occur in this situation? He just keeps hounding her. Could he make his son any more the victim and her any more the aggressor or perpetrator here? Which outcome do you want to have occur in this situation? 1, Joshua repents, is forgiven, and set free from bondage to sin, and ultimately your marriage is restored. 2, Joshua repents, is forgiven, and set free from bondage to sin, and your marriage is never restored. 3, Joshua remains in bondage to his sin, dies, and burns in hell. A very dramatic third option. The one you pick will have, the one you pick is the one you will fight for both consciously and unconsciously, and you have a lot of influence regarding the final outcome in this situation, whether you want that influence or not. He gives her incomplete options, right? These are the 3 options you have to choose from. And it's designed to manipulate her into accepting the one he wants her to accept, while never addressing what his son did. Oh, he acknowledges that he's to blame. He acknowledges that he apparently is in some kind of bondage to sin, but he's hounding her about this. And he continues, which one will you fight for? She says, I'm done fighting. I'm fighting for my next breath. Oh, then you're fighting for number 3. Right? Just go to the most dramatic option possible. Oh, you want him to die and burn in hell. Is that what you want? Classic manipulation. She says, you are wrong. I fought for number 1 with every bit of strength I had, and when I faltered, my mumsy was there to pick me up, dust me off, and put me back into the fight. I put every bit of blood, love, faith, and hope, my dignity, my accomplishments, my body. I sacrificed everything. I don't have anything left to fight with. The only loving thing Josh did for me was tell me and get me out of there. What did he do to her? Chris says, allegedly, you are right when you say you don't have anything left to fight with. That's exactly where you need to be. You're going to see Chris reach an all-time low in his gaslighting here. Listen, you're right when you say you don't have anything left to fight with. That's exactly where you need to be. I want you to know that I'm fighting as much for you, as much and more. Sorry, I want you to know that I'm fighting for you as much and more than I'm fighting for Josh. But I have nothing left of my own to fight with either. But I have learned that these battles are never fought and never won by our strength of reason, fortitude, or cunning. Josh's battle is not with Barb, it is with God. As God's children, we know from his word that our Heavenly Father is fighting with Josh and for Josh, and we are all caught up in that battle and have been viciously wounded in the fray. Notice how he equates his suffering and everybody else's with hers. She's the one that was sinned against, but they're all wounded in the fray. But the battle is not finished. you are suffering deeply because of the sins committed against you. And your sufferings have meaning. What were the sins committed against her? Because it completely matters. This doesn't sound trivial. This sounds very serious. And they have come to you so that God's purposes will be accomplished in and through you, so that our great God and Savior Jesus Christ will be glorified. Oh, like it's a gift that Josh sinned against her. Nice, Chris. But remember, Jesus' greatest moment of glory was the most shameful spectacle in all of human history. His being beaten, bruised, spit on, punched in the face, scourged, a crown of thorns thrust into his skull, nails driven into his hands and feet on a Friday morning nearly 2,000 years ago. What is he writing, a story? When you see this kind of repetitive babble and this minutia expounded upon in the middle of a very serious situation, you're listening to manipulation. It's designed to distract from what's really going on. What does Friday morning, the Friday morning he was crucified, have anything to do with your son sinning against her? It doesn't, but it's poetic and it's very spiritual. So he just rambles on. But unlike you, listen, he truly was an innocent victim. Oh yes, let's blame her some more. Let's make her out to be the perpetrator some more. Let's blame her for something. Victim blaming 101, or blame shifting, however you want to put it. It was your sins, he says, capital letters, your sins that he was bearing and being punished for on the cross. And on that cursed tree, your sins were defeated, and the cup of God's wrath was drunk down the dregs by Jesus for you. This is a disgusting, utterly disgusting display of gaslighting. And I suspect many people are hitting the unsubscribe button from Pirate Christian Radio right about now, or they should be. It's a theologically true statement, but the reason for which he's saying it is designed to manipulate her to his ends. You know, you're not innocent either. Jesus had to die for you. Therefore, give Josh a break. But if you think it's bad now, the gospel is more powerful than law. The law can only make sinners, but the good news of the sufferings and death of our Savior transforms sinners into saints. Your husband and my son has succumbed to the temptations of the devil and has been chained and led away. He meant to write lead away into bondage and darkness, and Satan intends to kill him and drag him into hell. It continues, the pain inflicted on you was all part of Satan's plan and was intended to isolate Joshua in order to improve the devil's chances of securing Joshua's destruction. Let's just make it more about him. Tell us more about how Joshua is the victim. Somehow, paradoxically, the victim that allegedly Chris Rosebrough knows is to blame. This is disgusting. You're in this fight whether you want to be or not. Whether you have the strength to be in it or not, you didn't pick it, it picked you. What is this, Lord of the Rings? It picked her. And what's at stake here is your husband's eternal soul. That's quite a story to be caught up in. I wonder how the next chapter will read. This could only be described as spiritual abuse, or worse. She says, I have put everything I can into Josh. Whatever else he needs must come from someone or something greater than me. I will pray unceasing for him, and I hope with every fiber of my being that he chooses to turn toward the cross, but I'm done. If the Lord brings me back into his life at a later time, then I will pray and do my very best to be an instrument for the Lord. I have fulfilled my duty as a godly wife and mother, and I am allowed to walk away now. To which he says, truly, that is your right under the law. Now, is he talking about God's law or man's law? He doesn't make it clear. But he acknowledges that she has the right to walk away. And notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, you know, the Bible says that you can only walk away in the case of sexual immorality, so you don't have the right to walk away. He didn't have an affair on you. He didn't commit some sexual sin. He doesn't say that, at least not in this correspondence. Instead, he says, truly, that is your right under the law. This seems to be in glaring opposition to the narrative they published, which is that Josh Roseborough had grounds for biblical divorce because she just simply abandoned the marriage. As you can see, there is much more to her walking away than what she just didn't want to work things out. What sin did he commit against her? Because it completely matters. There's a big difference between, for example, right? Just hypothetically, for example, if somebody said, I'm struggling with the besetting sin of losing my temper in the heat of a moment, and I'm struggling with the besetting sin of having a homosexual relationship, there's a big difference between those things. One of them would be grounds for biblical divorce, and the other would not. So it completely matters. As you can see, Chris allegedly was working very hard to keep whatever he did quiet and to gaslight her into silence and to tell her how much she wasn't innocent because Jesus had to die for her too, despite acknowledging that he knows Joshua's to blame and he'd never tell anyone otherwise. To blame for what? For the catalyst that destroyed their marriage? To blame for what? Very interesting. You should be disgusted. And now you're seeing that the interaction with the man who had mental illness was not a one-off event. This is a disposition of a man who abuses his spiritual authority and knowledge of the scriptures for ends like this. Let me tell you about the Friday morning Jesus was crucified. You know, the gospel is more powerful than law. She's no dummy. She acknowledges what you're telling me to do sounds more like self-immolation. And I've heard stuff like this before. It's what my molesting grandfather told my mother after he molested her. That alone is a very telling comparison from her. And yet, this is one of Justin Peters' friends. There's him and Chris Roseborough. Justin Peters, Phil Johnson, Todd Friel. What are they going to say to this? Chris Roseborough, who has deemed newsworthy false allegations about me, which we'll get into. Looks like he's got some things to answer for himself, not to mention Joshua Roseborough. But I wonder what Pulpit and Pen, Chris's friend over there, Jordan Hall, will say about this. According to this 2018 article, those who hold to the permanence view of marriage, such as the owner of Pulpit and Pen, contend that divorce is never morally permissible. I suppose in Jordan Hall's view, it's never permissible unless you're a friend of his, in which case he'll look the other way because he's a glaring hypocrite. Or does Jordan Hall have an article for us about the marriage and divorce of Joshua Roseborough, admittedly? If it's never morally permissible, perhaps Pulpit and Pen can explain to us why they think this one is permissible unless they don't. While they were looking into Braxton Canner, maybe they should have been looking into Josh Roseborough. But you can see how they must protect their own. Now, given all of this, you could imagine my shock, my surprise, and my near chuckle when I received this message from none other than Chris Roseborough on a public YouTube comment. How's your wife? I thought, surely he must have intended this for a Joshua other than me. Perhaps he intended this for Joshua Roseborough, in which case the follow-up question would be, which wife are you speaking of, his first wife that he sinned against or his second wife. You could imagine my further shock when his partner in ministry, his friend and promoter and cohort, Justin Peters, joined in a mob-like tactic and has on multiple occasions, and said this: "Speaking of hypocrites, happy anniversary, Joshua." Again, I thought, surely Justin Peters must have been talking about Joshua Rosebrough, in which case the follow-up question is, which anniversary are you speaking of, Justin? His first wedding anniversary or his second one? Does Justin Peters know about Josh Rosebrough's first marriage? Does he care? You're seeing the true character of Justin Peters. This mocking, jeering, disgusting display, most people aren't surprised to see something like that from Chris Rosebrough, especially not now, or Jordan Hall. But there's a reason Justin Peters is friends with both of them, because he is just like them. And Chris Rosebrough continued, Joshua Chavez continues his silence regarding his marriage while others are now speaking out against him. See, Chris Rosebrough is very interested in me or my personal life and asking questions about rumors that he's heard. It's funny. It sounds like Chris Rosebrough was interested in silencing his ex-daughter-in-law so that nobody found out what his son did to her. The unmitigated gall and staggering hypocrisy from these men. Can you believe that after what we just read, Chris Rosebrough, of all people, came to ask me this? But what's he talking about, Josh? Well, him and Justin are referencing an article that was written by none other than their yellow journalistic friend, Jordan Hall of Pulpit and Pen. Remember Jordan Hall that bullied 15-year-old Braxton Canner? Remember Jordan Hall, who, according to a Pulpit and Pen insider, stirs up controversies and engages in vulgar language when speaking about his enemies? Remember that Jordan Hall? The one who was caught lying about Ergen Canner's marriage? The one who people are apparently afraid of, their physical safety and that of their families? The one who is across every breed and creed of Christianity nearly unanimously regarded as a rabble-rouser and a danger to the cross of Christ and the gospel truly? You know, that Jordan Hall? Yeah, that's the Jordan Hall they're talking about. I was just one of many targets in his crosshairs over the years. I haven't spoken about Jordan Hall in probably over 2 years. The last video I did on him, I'll link those as well. But I apparently flustered his ego something awful, and he's been stewing on it ever since. And so Jordan Hall, the habitual liar, wrote this quite salacious article about me 6 months ago. And for several reasons we'll briefly touch on, I haven't responded to this in 6 months. At the risk of sounding arrogant, frankly, Jordan Hall is not typically worth my time. And he's worth my time here today because, as you can see, this is applicable in a much broader context, and the ramifications are much bigger than just me. Here's an example of how I was attacked, but there are many examples. There's a wake of devastation behind these guys. And since many of the people watching simply don't have that voice, well, allow me to be that voice for you. I can relate. But people, even with bigger names than me, like James White, can relate exactly to what I'm talking about. And I don't think James White likes me much, but we're in firm agreement about Jordan Hall. In any event, take note of this. This article was written on August 24th. Notice that on the left, Justin Peters Ministries at 12:17 p.m. on August 24th had an official statement about the article, okay? 12:17 p.m., Justin Peters Ministries says, in the interest of exposing the unfruitful deeds of darkness, we, the board members of Justin Peters Ministries, offer this post. We are commanded to mark those who are evil, divisive men who deceive others. and strongly reprove those who are detestable and disobedient and worthless for any good deed. Wow. May the exposure of these things bring repentance to evil men, purify the church, and silence the mouths of foolish mockers. Signed, the board of Justin Peters Ministries. Some strong words directed at me. That was at 12:17 p.m. Justin Peters shared Service Christi's Life of Sin to be exposed on Monday. But the actual article was not posted until 6 hours later. At 6:01 p.m., the actual article was posted. What Justin posted was a countdown clock that Jordan Hall, in Jerry Springer-like fashion, posted. Oh, the countdown to the end of Service Christi. Right? Ever one for theatrics and creating controversies, as everybody knows. Put a countdown clock. And then the actual article was published at 6:01. So let me ask this. How on earth did the board of Justin Peters Ministries know what was written in an article that wasn't published for 6 more hours? They had an official statement written 6 hours before this article was ever published. There's only 2 options. Either one, they had prior knowledge to what was written and were therefore in some form of collusion with Jordan Hall and Pulpit and Pen, or they engaged in a form of speculative false witness and decided to make an official statement about something they hadn't even read. Which one was it? Either way, it's bad and proves the hypocritical and disgusting character of Justin Peters himself. Now, don't take my word for it. Justin Peters' own followers, the day he shared this, these are people with top fan status on their Facebook accounts. For those of you not familiar with Facebook, I'm not even familiar with this myself terribly, but people that are avid commenters and followers of a page will apparently receive a top fan badge. It means that they're, well, like it says, a top fan. These are people that support Justin. Listen to what they say, and because it was publicly posted, I'm not going to block their names out. Vicky Moran says, why all the drama? An actual reveal time on someone's sin? Unfortunately, this comes off as a publicity stunt. This is a little too Jerry Springer for my Christian ethics. Indeed. I'm confused by this, and I'm concerned this is becoming personal for Justin Peters. Exactly right. I'm concerned, and perhaps he has lost his objectivity. I'm no fan of Service Christi's bizarre and vicious attacks. Listen, clearly he's not only a false teacher, but a complete nut job. That's what she thinks of me. Justin did a long YouTube video regarding this guy and offered he was done with the matter, yet here we are rubbernecking on Service Christi's sin. This feels creepy and vindictive. I'm disappointed. Well, despite Vicky's misgivings about me, she's completely correct that it is creepy and vindictive. You should expect nothing less from a salacious yellow journalist like Jordan Hall. And yet Justin Peters is a friend and partner of his. Let's continue. Ellie says, Justin, why is your board associating with Pulpit and Pen? I've learned a lot from you, but this is disappointing. And he should be. Probably more disappointed now. David Woodhouse says, nah, not a chance of supporting this. Exactly. Jason Clark, look at this, 24 people liked his comment. Yeah, I normally appreciate Justin Peters' stuff, but aligning with Pulpit and Pen is a no-go. Hall is a cage-stage narcissist who loves discernment until he's the one being discerned. Hopefully Peters doesn't go this route. Well, I hate to inform him, but Peters has already gone this route, unfortunately. Stephen Dew says, J.D. Hall should be exposed. I got banned from one of his little Facebook groups for the way he talked about James White's daughter. He was rude and downright sinful when I challenged him and his sin, and he blocked me and kicked me out of the group while letting the other people rail on her. Seeing Justin Peters, align with this guy is disheartening. Michael Johnson says, Justin, why align with these slanderers? A countdown clock? Really? Yes, really. The pulpit and pen finds great pleasure in slandering others. That's why people call them Slander and Key. Don't fall in with these wolves. They have slandered others, and given time, they'll slander you too. Exactly. Service Christi should be called on his sin, but let's not make a show out of it. Shame on you guys. Shame on you. To another 22 people like that, Kim says. Michael, yes, this does feel like a show. It's like they want us to get our popcorn and tune in at the exact moment they expose the monster he is. I'm also surprised Justin shared the countdown. Well, perhaps you're more surprised now that Justin Peters is a friend and conference partner of Jordan Hall and Chris Rosebrough, as is Phil Johnson. There's Phil Johnson of Grace to You with Jordan Hall. There's Phil Johnson, Justin Peters, and Jordan Hall preaching together. There's Todd Friel and Jordan Hall and Chris Rosebrough and Phil Johnson preaching together. You get the point. They're all close. I'm not the first one that Jordan has slandered. I'm one of who knows how many, hundreds perhaps, in a long list of slandering. As the Pulpit and Pen insider said, and many people that I've spoken with, they said, Josh, don't take the bait. Don't take the bait. And those that read it realize there's a complete and utter lack of evidence about the things that he wrote. No sources, no evidence. How could there be? There isn't any. But most people that read it recognize that. Reasonable people that hate me are looking for any reason to hate me, and anything will do, even if there's no evidence of it. So ridiculous was it that even some of my enemies, people that don't like me at all, like Vicky there in Justin's comments, took to writing critiques of Jordan's accusations against me because it was so inherently contradictory. It's like he tried so hard to make me sound like such a monster, it almost had the reverse effect. So the only people that give credence to stuff that Jordan Hall writes are people that are like him, who are loose cannons themselves and have an appetite for tasty trifles and enjoy lies. So just briefly, as I said, many people said, Josh, don't take the bait. That's what he wants. Your response to this is he needs you to finish the other end of it. He's trying to draw you out. He's trying to bait you. I know I can disprove these things. Boy, was it salacious. But it fell flat on its face. And yet that didn't stop desperate people like Chris Rosebrough and Justin Peters from trying to revive this dead and ridiculous narrative. And ridiculous is an understatement. It's quite disgusting. And despite Justin Peters knowing that Jordan Hall is bad for business, so to speak, he's so blinded by hatred for me, he couldn't stop. He couldn't stop himself. He could not resist, was apparently salivating at the opportunity to silence me because in the realm of ideas and doctrine he cannot contend or will not contend, so he seeks to make things personal. Now, Jordan Hall said, let me point this out briefly, Jordan Hall said that he had to be coaxed by certain mentors to write this article. Given that Justin Peters Ministries promoted the article a full 6 hours before it was written, there are good reasons to believe that Justin Peters was one of those who coaxed him to write it, and therefore this appears to be premeditated false witness on the part of Justin Peters. We'll get into some of that in just a moment, but we're going to hear from James White, and immediately you're going to hear Jordan Hall's own voice. Listen to how deranged this sounds, how unhinged, not just how unhinged it sounds, how unhinged it is. This is Jordan Hall, folks.
So He has massive egg on his face where James White is dare going to accuse Pulpit and Pen of being fundamentalist, legalist. It's a perfect recovery environment. Perfect. Sir, your daughter went through 3 last names in 1 year because you were wrong about Apologia Church being a good recovery environment. So maybe, just maybe, shut your mouth and stop making accusations about fundamentalism. You know what? My daughter hasn't got 3 last names in 1 year. I didn't defend.
Do you hear that? If you haven't seen the second video I did on Jordan Hall, I did 2, Jordan Hall versus Jordan Hall, part 1 and part 2. And in the second one, he's got this habit where he just seems to lose himself. I don't know if he just doesn't realize that how this sounds to other people, or if he has no concept that this sounds completely bizarre, but he's doing all these voices and mockings. He's completely unaware, oblivious, or doesn't care how he sounds or however anybody thinks. And shockingly, Justin Peters has the audacity to say that he thinks I'm an angry man. He doesn't like me because I'm angry, and yet he's a friend and a partner of Jordan Hall. What do you say to somebody like that? It only proves the irrational, blinding hatred of me, because he can't or won't respond to videos that I've made that have to do with doctrinal issues. So they've sought to make it personal. And look how they've fallen into the pit that they've dug.
Through 3 last names in 1 year because you were wrong about Apologia Church being a good recovery environment. So maybe, just maybe, shut your mouth and stop making accusations about fundamentalism. You know what? My daughter hasn't got 3 last names in 1 year. I didn't defend a church as a positive recovery environment while behind my back, my son-in-law was being an addict and a drunk. So just admit you're wrong sometimes, James White. Just admit you're wrong sometimes.
Okay.
And for everyone going, that's all.
Okay, so notice how low JD will go.
Very low.
Most people have been shocked by that. The man has no earthly idea what he's talking about. He is taking the testimony of unbelievers. Here is a man who is a pastor who knows that dealing with situations like this is not only heartbreaking, but it requires personal knowledge of what's going on. He is willing from afar, in his ignorance, to slander others, to slander fellow ministers in a way that is absolutely, utterly disqualifying.
Absolutely, utterly disqualifying. And yet Todd Friel, Phil Johnson, Justin Peters have never publicly addressed Jordan Hall's habitual behavior. Absolutely and utterly disqualifying, says James White. And I agree.
He has no earthly idea what he's talking about. He is lying, but is lying based upon just so much ignorance? Because he wasn't here. He has no idea what the actual facts are. None. Zero. But the scary thing is he would love to get more dirt if he could dig it.
Oh, would he?
What kind of a person spends his or her life thinking like this every day from morning till night?
A disturbed person. And that's the whole nature of Jordan Hall. He is obsessed with, I mean, gosh, all of his articles are about, not all of them, but so many about, this one's divorce and what this one did, and we obtained, it's not polemics. Polemics is about doctrine and addressing things according to Scripture and why this is wrong. Now, he does have articles like that, but so much of it, as you've seen, is very personal. He's lost it. Listen.
That cannot be a happy place to be.
No.
That is a destructive place to be. And I am one of a number of people who have tried to warn this man, because we've seen him going this direction for a long time. I think we failed. He has no idea what he's talking about.
Yep.
Jeff did come into the studio. We talked about, was that 2016 or 2017? I think it was 2016. Sounds about right. 2016. We came in here. We provided the first-hand information as much as could possibly be done while doing things correctly. You can go back, and those programs are still available. You can look at them yourselves. We gave the timeline because we were actually here. and actually had the information that he does not have. But here, this is what I mean. And let me say this to anyone who is getting associated with J.D. Hall.
Listen up.
You need to understand. We were once on the same side of things. But if you do not toe his line, he will come after you with everything you've ever said to him.
Remember, one of the commenters in under Justin Peters' Facebook page said, "Justin, why align with these slanderers? Given enough time, he'll slander you too." Now, that's not the best motive for not aligning with somebody, but gosh, you would think for even reasons of self-preservation, it might be some kind of motive. The right motive for not partnering with Jordan Hall is acknowledging that he's a reprobate and a threat to truth. And as other people have said, he's a one pastor, a deacon of Garrett's church, former church, Garrett Mullet, said he's concerned somebody's going to get hurt. That's what he said.
Don't tell him anything that you do not want to have twisted and turned and then posted on the internet. You just need to realize, if you're hitching your star to him, you are hitching your star to someone who will demand absolute loyalty. You will never be able to disagree on anything. Just be prepared. Just be aware. Listen to what's going on. Listen to what he's willing to do.
Anything.
In light of things he said, just listen to how far he's gone now. How far will he go in the future is the question.
Like James said earlier, he doesn't have any limits. There's no limits to how far he'll go. And the more he hates you personally, the more he'll dig his heels in. I don't think he considers consequences at all. I don't think he cares. I don't think he's concerned. He doesn't seem to have a filter. And I'm just talking about by normal people standards. Forget Christian standards. He just doesn't seem to care at all. How he sounds, the things that he does. So the people that are around him and know him or have, been associated with him closely say that, he does this to drum up business and headlines, and he's angry that God hasn't made him as famous as he wants to be yet. Well, here's another one of James White's associates. Listen to his testimony of how Jordan just flat out lied about him constantly.
And I let Mr. Hall know in no uncertain terms that it was my opinion, and I still hold to this opinion, that he and his organization are yellow journalists. And this recounting on his part is a bold-faced lie. I considered Hank Hanegraaff's moving to the Eastern Orthodox Church to be an act of apostasy. But at the time I was contacting him, I read the story that was written and was basically telling him, you are reporting facts that you don't have yet. We are still waiting on a lot of information. You have half of the story. You are extrapolating information from that half of the story, and you are drawing conclusions and reporting them as facts that are based purely on speculation. It is my clear memory that I said to him, you take the few facts that you do have and extrapolate additional information from them via speculation, and his response was, I have that right.
Listen to that stunning admission. You get this some kernel of truth, then you speculate on it and extrapolate from there, and he says, I have that right. Basically, the right to lie. The right to a vivid imagination. He does this all the time to everyone. I'm one of many. And Jordan Hall is a smaller peg in a bigger, cog here. Or smaller cog in a bigger wheel. I don't know. You finish the analogy. There are people like Justin Peters or Phil Johnson that appear to... It's almost like they use Jordan Hall to do their dirty work. That's how it seems, because they know he doesn't care. Listen.
Oh, yeah, he thinks it's a gift.
And I replied, you don't have that right to report a full story with only half of the facts.
Right.
And folks, I'm looking you square in the eye, and I'm telling you, this is yellow journalism at its core. He, as the news division, is reporting this to you as news. This is not news, and it's a defamation to me that he's put these words in my mouth that I would never say. And if you doubt me, go back to the programs where I have addressed this in the past, and you will find that what I've just told you is entirely consistent with what I've said before.
And yet Justin Peters finds camaraderie and fellowship with his friend Jordan Hall. And so does Phil Johnson, and so does Todd Friel, right? There is Jordan Hall, and this is just the most apt analogy I can think of. There is a man who gained some fame, if you want to put it that way, on the internet a while back as a boxer. I think his name was Charlie Zelenoff. I think that's how you say it. But he would go around to gyms and Planet Fitness and stuff like this with some guy and a camera and 2 sets of boxing gloves and ask people if they wanted to spar. He's like, "Hey, do you want to have a light sparring match or something?" And they would put the gloves on, like they thought they were making some kind of fun little video, and he would just start swinging on them like a crazy person. He just would start pummeling them. Caught everybody off guard. They didn't know what was happening. And so he would just go around trolling people like this, punching them in the face. They didn't know what was going on. They're like, "Hey, I thought we were just, what are you doing?" And finally he challenged a couple of real boxers, I think including Deontay Wilder, and got completely pummeled. But he built up this reputation online saying, "I'm the champion boxer. I've beat 138 people," or whatever it was, right? Charlie Zelenoff, the internet boxing troll. Go look him up. The antics employed by someone like that, they seem to be eerily similar to things exhibited by Jordan Hall. This is the guy who, for example, went to the Dickinson Church and started screaming for them to call the cops and so forth. Just here's a brief example of the sorts of things that he does to drum up attention for himself.
It's on GoPro.
Go start trouble somewhere else.
No. Let me preach to you the gospel, because it's not happening with Rodney Howard Brown.
We're going to call Red. We'll see.
Do it! I've got it on GoPro.
We're going to call.
Do it now. Do it now. I've got a wound on my hand. Let's do it.
It's fine.
Do it.
Yeah, you're disruptive. You're not expecting the service.
You hurt me.
Welcome back.
You hurt me.
Yeah. Good. Good.
You hurt me.
So have a good night.
You know what?
And
hey, this is JD Hall. I'm in St. Louis at the Revoice conference, and this is as gay as I could look. Tried to get in. This is as gay as I could look.
That's as gay as he could look. Right? That's the sort of stuff he does. Dresses in costume as a gay man to infiltrate conferences. It goes into some church with admittedly, some heretical church with a GoPro camera just to start screaming, and then acts shocked when they drag him out. And everybody could see this is just a publicity stunt. So whether it's in his actions and going places, he apparently threatened Matthew Garrett to Matthew 18 him. He asked him where his church was and who his elders were, because he didn't want to have to Matthew 18 him if he didn't comply to remove the comments that he made about him or something. He's a habitual rabble-rouser. And yet, is supported by this guy, the Bible-thumping wingnut, right? Well, at least the last part of that name is correct. Anybody who supports Jordan Hall probably could be described as a wingnut. But there's no Bible involved in it. Or if it is, it's a pretext and an excuse to harass people, to bully people. Yeah, but what about all those awful things he said about you, Josh? Gosh, it was so salacious. Yes, like I said, there's several reasons I didn't address it, not least of which is that's exactly what he wants. He wants to bait and draw people out. And again, he's getting attention today. I assume probably not the attention that he wants, although in Jordan's mind, perhaps he absolutely loves this. I don't know. In any event, it's as Garrett Mullet said, don't feed the troll. That's it. Don't feed the troll. He is in the process of rebranding or whatever. He apparently is desperate for the attention, and anything will do, like James White has attested to, like this guy Rich, I think was his name, attested to. But by brief example, we'll read some of what he wrote about me. Like I said, it was incredibly horrible, disgusting stuff. Listen. Little did any of us know that amidst these videos and tirades, Chavez was trafficking in humans. Using women for sex and money, fabricating a marriage and putting away a woman as though she were a used garment. Some of these men have provided their own retorts and rebuttals to his lies, such as this video from Justin Peters. Of course, he shares his friend Justin Peters' video. But many of these men have ignored his great insults to their doctrine and character. And there was a whole laundry list of ridiculous things, absolutely ridiculous, provably false things. And not just false, but a very egregious type of defamation. Now, let me just note something here, that Jordan has no clue what he's talking about. None. This is why there's no evidence of what he's talking about. He's just doing what Jordan Hall does. And so, but he accuses me here of trafficking in humans. That's a crime, ladies and gentlemen. It's a very specific crime. I believe it's a felony. So he's accusing me of trafficking in humans. And this is a big crime. It's one that's in the news a lot. When I said earlier, it's like he tried so hard to paint me as a monster that it's unbelievable. And it's unbelievable because there's no reason to believe it. And it's false. It's ridiculous. That's not a strong enough word. And not only does he not have evidence of this, there's evidence to the contrary of this. But here's the interesting thing. If he does have evidence that I was trafficking in humans, pay attention here. Does he have a report of this? Does he have an FBI report? Because I believe clergy are mandated reporters. If they have knowledge of human trafficking and fail to report it, it's against the law, I believe. Now, according to my calculations here, Jordan has had a solid 6 months to report me to the authorities if he has evidence that I'm trafficking in humans. Let me help you out here. He hasn't reported this to the authorities. He couldn't possibly have reported this to the authorities because he doesn't have evidence of this, because no evidence exists. Do you understand what a massive charge this is? That Justin Peters gave credence to, and Chris Rosebrough, no surprise, and even Phil Johnson has referenced this as if this article has some validity. Trafficking in humans. What a massive accusation without any evidence, not to mention using women for sex and money, fabricating a marriage, putting away a woman as though she were a used garment. Not only is this false witness, biblically, but to accuse somebody of committing a crime is in law what's known as defamation per se. It is a very egregious type of defamation, which means that if I sued Jordan, I wouldn't have to prove damages. Damages are assumed. That's how bad this is. There used to be laws on the books in certain states, I believe including Montana, where this was actually illegal in a criminal court, not a civil court. In any event, defamation per se. To what end do you get involved in a legal dispute with Pulpit and Pen? I know it's false. I know it's ridiculous. I know the nature and character of the man who's habitually trying to make a name for himself. And no rational person believes anything he says, because they shouldn't. Because he's Jordan Hall. He is a habitual liar and a rabble-rouser. But Justin Peters gave credence to this. Did Justin Peters see this before it was published? Does Justin Peters claim to have evidence that I was trafficking in humans? Do you know what a disgusting absolutely disgusting allegation that is, using women for sex and money? Zero evidence of this. Negative evidence of this. Disgusting. Most people aren't surprised Jordan Hall would say this, but that Justin Peters gave credence to this, even his own followers were grossed out. But if he has evidence of this and he didn't report it, that's only an indictment against him. There is no evidence because none exists. But to add insult to injury, what a slap in the face to actual victims of human trafficking. Way to trivialize real victims of human trafficking by falsely accusing somebody else of that crime. Way to trivialize people who have actually gone through the horror of human trafficking. And how dare you accuse me of that? It's an insult to me, obviously, and it's an insult to everyone who's actually been a victim of that. This man is an evil reprobate, and so are his friends. Chris Rosebrough, as you've already seen. Justin Peters, Phil Johnson. Why have they dropped this narrative all of a sudden, moreover? In 6 months? If they really believed I was trafficking in humans, shouldn't that have been all they were talking about for 6 months? They know it's a lie. They know it's a lie. Justin Peters knows it's a lie. And yet, he still promoted this. He's still friends with Jordan Hall. Now listen, my unwillingness to disclose certain things because it's none of your business is simply that. It's none of your business. I don't have an obligation to satiate the appetite of a group of voyeurs and confirm or disconfirm to them things that they have no clue about. They couldn't possibly. And if that's the appetite you have, shame on you. You have no reason to believe any of this. So, the allegations that, I'm covering something up or I'm trying to hide something because I won't talk about it, like Chris Rosebrough implied. Not disclosing something is not the same as hiding something. It's simply none of your business. I know the truth. And if you don't need to know, then you don't need to know. And there are many reasons for that have nothing to do with me. But if you think I have something to hide, it's quite the opposite. And I can say this, I never abandoned anybody. I never sent anybody away. And common decency would preclude me from saying anything further. And you should really check your sources. That's what happens when you listen to men like Jordan Hall, who bully 15-year-old kids and try to get them to contact him privately. Men who are habitual liars and reprobates. But that didn't stop Justin Peters from sending an email recently demanding 7 questions he wants answered about me. I think it was several questions. Answer these questions. Answer these. You know why they're asking questions? Because they don't know. They don't know. They need my help to attempt to indict me. They're still asking questions. You know, Justin, I've got some questions for you. Since you're so interested in asking questions, how come you've never addressed the Braxton Canner tragedy? How come you've never addressed Jordan Hall's habitual bullying and lying? How come you haven't addressed Josh Rosebrough's vulgarity and scantily clad women on his Facebook page? How come you haven't addressed his divorce and remarriage? How come you haven't addressed that Chris Rosebrough apparently attempted to silence his ex-daughter-in-law so that nobody found out about Josh Rosebrough's divorce and remarriage, or the reason for, his divorce and remarriage? How come you haven't answered any of these questions? How come you've never addressed this? Maybe those are questions you should probably think about answering, because we actually have evidence of those things. This speculative prying about things you know nothing of is going to be your own undoing. The whole lot. What a shame. You know, isn't it interesting that Chris Rosebrough and Josh Rosebrough's defense was that you should believe their testimony. right? The setting the record straight from Josh Roseborough. All of this stuff said about me were lies. He claims that his ex-wife and his ex-in-laws lied about him maliciously. They just made up all this stuff and to defame his character and so forth. Funny how they never even considered that when it came to me. They read an article from Jordan Hall, of all people, and decided to take it at face value as if it were true. Never bothered to consider, hey, maybe somebody's lying about Josh, but that's what they want you to consider when it comes to their situation. Funny how that works. And yet Josh Roseborough claims he was abandoned. He had biblical grounds for divorce, but because he was abandoned, and he wants us to believe that. Funny how they never considered any of those things. You know, it almost seems like, if you read that whole article, it almost looks like somebody said, hey, Jordan, here's a blueprint you can use to accuse Josh Chavez. Just use all the stuff they accused Josh Roseborough of, or at least many of those things, and accuse Josh Chavez. Eerily paralleled in the accusations Josh Roseborough says were leveled against him and the things Jordan Hall has accused me of. You be the judge. But speculating about gossip that you receive from Jordan Hall is a poor thing to engage in. And as James White has noted, Jordan Hall doesn't know what he's talking about. And if you believe what he wrote, good luck. Good luck with that. And if you need my help to attempt to indict me, you should ask yourself why God said, make sure there's 2 or 3 witnesses before you start believing things that people say about somebody else. Because things aren't always what they seem. And almost everything Jordan Hall writes isn't what it seems. There couldn't be a worse source than Jordan Hall. And yet, as we've seen, look at the glaring hypocrisy on the part of Chris Roseborough and Josh Roseborough and Phil Johnson and Justin Peters and Todd Friel and all these men. So interested in speculating about things about me. Now, why is this? They hate me with a perfect hatred. And if you're standing for truth, men like that will hate you too. And in some way, you will experience something like this, and maybe some of you already have. Again, I say, not everybody has this voice or the ability to present things like this on a platform like this. And so in some ways, I'm a voice for many other people. This is nothing unique. Whether it's Jordan Hall or Chris Roseborough or others like them, others that they have influenced, this mindset is permeating and infecting Christianity. Prepare yourselves for it, because when you contradict men like this, religious hypocrites, all bets are off. Paul was falsely accused. Jesus was falsely accused. All Stephen did was speak the truth, and they stoned him to death out in the open. There's no scruples. Leave it to James White, who there's a mutual disagreement here about many things. And yet even James White can say, Jordan Hall is really bad. And I would add to that, Chris Roseborough, as you've seen, is as bad or worse because they're of the same mind. Justin Peters is as bad or worse because he sanctioned this and is of the same mind, but he appears to be more respectable. Phil Johnson, as bad or worse because he has a big reputation, a big platform, to whom much is given, much will be required. And I will say this, Justin Peters also said in a recent email that if he wanted, he could. He sent this to somebody else, not to me, it was sent to me. If I wanted to, I could make a video about Josh and his marriage, and it'd probably get a couple 100,000 views. I'm sitting on a lot of stuff, he said. Let me submit to Justin Peters. He would be well advised to rethink that. Now, he did say, even in the email, I don't want to do this, or I'm not going to do this because I don't want to keep this going. Keep it going? You gave credence to allegations that I was using women for sex and money and trafficking in humans? Nothing short of a massively public apology will ever right that wrong, Justin. But if you think you're sitting on stuff and you have any inclination that you want to make some video that'll get a couple 100,000 views, you'd be well advised to rethink that. And I will say publicly here to Justin, check your inbox. Check your emails for an email from me marked confidential. Follow the instructions very carefully. And let's see if you're the man of God you claim to be. Because you have no clue what you're talking about or what you're dealing with. It has nothing to do with me. So here I am publicly urging Justin Peters to check his email inbox for an email from me if he's even remotely inclined to retaliate for things which there is actual evidence of. And before you ask further questions about me, maybe, just maybe, you should clean up your own backyard and start addressing your friends Jordan Hall and Chris Rosebrough. Let's get some final thoughts from James White.
But he makes these accusations, and then he will just go low. He will go as low as he can go. Because I think he knows he can only go so long with his audience before getting some below-the-belt shots in to keep their attention. I think what will be demonstrated is the fact that Jordan Hall has no limits as to what he will publish, allege, assert, whether he has personal knowledge of the situation or not. He will repeat any slander that is going to serve his purposes. Anything at all. He has no limitations. He doesn't know anything about what he's talking about, but that won't stop him. He is absolutely convinced of his incredible correctness about everything.
His incredible correctness, and yet all the men pictured here support him and Chris Rosebrough, who instead of dealing with the dirt in his own backyard starts to project accusations on me. Maybe Chris Rosebrough can explain to us what Joshua Rosebrough was to blame for. As you can see, spiritual abuse abounds. Prepare for it, because if you ever run into men like this, and there are many others, this is what you'll be met with. And your response to it is going to be a very prayer-filled response. The battle's going to be won or lost on your knees. And I tell you in truth, I've prayed for all of these men. And it would have otherwise been a humanly impossible task. Apart from God's grace, I would not have prayed for them. I didn't want to. I was disinclined to pray for them. But again, that makes me no different than the world. How disgusting. The state of the church. Looking more like a documentary of a mafia story than New Testament Christianity. But that's what it is. That's where we are. And there's a snapshot of some things you should be aware of and some men who truly need to be held accountable. And since Justin Peters and Phil Johnson appear to have the greatest air of credibility about them, I think the responsibility is heavy on their shoulders, because as of now, they're proving themselves to be no different and perhaps even worse than the men they sanction. Until next time, God bless and Godspeed.